My name is Dulcie Whitford. I'm 28 years old, and for most of my life, my family had a single role for me: the disappointment. In the Whitford family, there were only two categories of children: the ones who made the family proud and the ones who were tolerated in silence. My older sister, Miranda, was the golden child. She was brilliant, polished, elegant, the kind of daughter my parents displayed like a trophy. Straight A's, elite schools, awards framed on walls. Every room she walked into, people noticed. Then there was me. I was diagnosed with dyslexia when I was 7 years old. Letters moved on the page like they were alive. Simple paragraphs took me twice as long to understand. Tests were nightmares. Reading out loud in class felt like public humiliation. But in my family, dyslexia was never treated like a challenge. It was treated like a flaw. My father, Gerald Whitford, never said it kindly, but he made his opinion clear from the beginning. To him, intelligence only counted if it looked impressive on paper. And my mother, Priscilla, was worse in a quieter way. She wrapped her cruelty in concern. When I was 12, Miranda got private violin lessons, French tutors, and SAT coaching from a Princeton graduate who charged more per hour than some people make in a week. When I asked if I could get extra reading support, my mother gave me that tired little sigh I grew up hating. "Dulcie, we've already done so much. At some point, we have to be realistic." Realistic. That word stayed with me for years. Realistic meant, don't expect too much, don't ask for help, don't imagine a future bigger than the one we've already assigned to you. So I adapted. I learned in ways no one had taught me. I used audiobooks, diagrams, voice notes, color-coded systems, and visual memory tricks. I taught myself how to survive in a world designed for people who processed information differently than I did. And every Sunday, I took the train to my grandmother Eleanor's apartment on the Upper West Side. She was the only person in my family who never looked at me like I was broken. She would sit beside me with tea and legal pads, and instead of forcing me to read things the normal way, she explained everything through stories, patterns, and connections. One afternoon, when I was 16, she placed her hand over mine and said something I didn't understand until much later. "You don't read the world the way other people do, Dully. That's not weakness, that's perspective." At the time, I smiled and nodded, but I had no idea that one day that different perspective would become the very thing that would bring my entire family to its knees, because for 20 years they called me slow. Then one night, in front of 350 people, I was handed something that would prove they had been wrong about me all along. And when that happened, everything changed. If you've never met old money Manhattan families, let me explain something. They don't just live in wealth, they perform it. The Whitfords were exactly that kind of family, the kind whose name appeared on museum donor walls, charity gala programs, and hospital wings. My father, Gerald Whitford, ran Whitford Properties, a commercial real estate company originally built by my grandmother, Eleanor, from almost nothing. By 2024, the company was worth over $90 million. And every holiday, my parents turned our family dinners into a stage where everyone had a role to play. Miranda was the star, I was the warning label. One Christmas in particular never left me. It was December 2018, and more than 20 relatives were gathered in my parents' townhouse on the Upper East Side. The house looked like something from a magazine spread: polished silver, catered food, fresh orchids, and a Christmas tree so large it nearly touched the ceiling. Everything was perfect, or at least it looked that way. We were halfway through dinner when my father stood, tapped his glass, and cleared his throat. That sound alone was enough to make the whole table go quiet. "I have some wonderful family news," he announced. Miranda smiled before he even said her name. He told everyone she had been accepted into Harvard Law School on scholarship. The room erupted. Applause, cheers, praise. My aunt actually teared up. My uncle slapped the table like Miranda had just won the Olympics. My father raised his glass toward her. "Miranda is the future of this family," he said proudly. "She's going to take the Whitford name even further than I ever could." Then his eyes shifted down the table, toward me, and I felt my stomach drop before he even opened his mouth. He gave a small smile, the kind people use when they're about to say something cruel and want to pretend it's harmless. "And Dulce," he said, pausing just long enough to make everyone uncomfortable. "Well, Dulce is also here." There was laughter, not loud laughter, the worst kind. That soft, nervous, cowardly laughter people use when they know something is wrong but don't want to be the one to stop it. I remember staring down at my plate so hard my vision blurred. And what hurt most wasn't just him, it was Miranda. She laughed too, not because it was funny, because she had learned, just like everyone else in that house, that it was easier to stand with power than beside the person being humiliated. Then, under the table, I felt someone squeeze my hand. My grandmother. I looked up. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't pretending. She was staring directly at my father with a look I had never seen before. It wasn't disappointment. It was fury. She didn't say anything at dinner, but 3 months later, she called me to her apartment and asked me to come alone. That visit would end with her placing a small wooden box in my hands and setting into motion something my father would never see coming. In March 2019, my grandmother called and asked me to visit her apartment. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was her tone. She sounded serious, almost urgent. By then, I had spent years in that apartment. It was the only place in my life where I felt like I could breathe without being measured. The walls were lined with framed photographs from the company's earliest years, black and white shots of my grandmother in hard hats, standing in front of half-built buildings, shaking hands with city officials, signing contracts at folding tables. She had built an empire from one small Brooklyn office. And unlike my father, she never forgot what struggle looked like. That afternoon, she was sitting in her favorite armchair by the window, wrapped in a cream-colored shawl. She looked smaller than usual, thinner, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. She motioned for me to sit. "Dooley," she said, "there's something I need you to understand." I remember feeling instantly nervous. She didn't waste time. "Your father believes this company belongs to him because he inherited it," she said. "But inheritance and worth are not the same thing." I didn't know what to say. She continued, her voice calm but deliberate. "Gerald knows how to wear authority. He knows how to sound impressive. But he does not understand what it means to build something with your hands or to protect people who can't defend themselves." Then she looked directly at me, and for a moment I had this strange feeling that she was trying to tell me much more than her words allowed. She reached beside her chair and handed me a small mahogany box with brass hinges. It was old, heavier than it looked. "Keep this somewhere safe," she said. I turned it over in my hands. "What's inside?" She smiled, but it wasn't her usual warm smile. It was knowing. Almost sad. "Not yet," she said. "When the time comes, you'll know." I laughed awkwardly. "That sounds dramatic." "It is dramatic," she replied. "Your family just hasn't realized it yet." I thought she was joking. She wasn't. I asked her if something was wrong, if she was worried about her health or about the company. She waved it off and changed the subject almost immediately. We spent the rest of the afternoon talking about books, weather, and one of her favorite old stories about closing her first major property deal while 8 months pregnant and wearing shoes that were 2 sizes too small. She made me laugh, and when I left, I tucked the box into my tote bag and forgot about it for a while. 18 months later, my grandmother died of pancreatic cancer. I was the one holding her hand when she passed, not my father, not Miranda, not my mother. Me. After the funeral, I took the box home and placed it in the back of my closet. I never opened it. At least, not then. Because I still believed, deep down, that maybe my family would eventually change. That maybe if I worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, proved myself enough, I'd finally earn a place in their world. I didn't know yet that by the time I opened that box, their world would already be collapsing. After graduating from a state university in 2022, I made what I thought was a practical decision. I applied to work at Whitford Properties. I wasn't expecting a glamorous title. I didn't think I'd walk into an executive office or take over anything. I just wanted a chance, a real one. I thought maybe if I worked inside the company my grandmother built, I could finally prove that I wasn't what my family had always claimed I was. My father generously offered me a position as an administrative assistant. My salary was $42,000 a year. That same month, Miranda joined the company too. Her starting salary? $280,000 plus bonuses. She entered through the front doors as future leadership. I entered through the side as office support. My job was a quiet humiliation disguised as opportunity. I booked conference rooms, made coffee runs, photocopied legal binders, printed pitch decks, and organized files for executives who either didn't know I was Gerald Whitford's daughter or pretended not to. I wasn't invited into strategy meetings. I wasn't asked for input. No one ever explained the business to me. But what they didn't realize was this. When people think you don't matter, they stop being careful around you. And that's when you start seeing everything. I listened. I watched. I paid attention to the things other people ignored. I noticed how executives talked differently in hallways than they did in meetings. I noticed which projects were rushed, which contracts raised tension, and which names kept appearing in internal memos. Most importantly, I noticed patterns. That had always been my strength, because while reading long blocks of text had always been difficult for me, understanding systems never was. I could look at a messy structure, business relationships, legal documents, decision chains, and suddenly see the whole shape of it, like a blueprint. My grandmother had recognized that before anyone else. Years earlier, she used to spread out old contracts on her dining table and teach me how to read them without reading them the way most people did. Your father reads documents like a lawyer. He looks for leverage. You read them like an architect. You see what holds everything together. At the time, I didn't fully appreciate what she meant, but by 2024, sitting in that copy room with stacks of lease agreements and investor packets, I understood. I wasn't stupid. I had simply never been taught in a way that allowed me to shine. And still, despite everything I could see and everything I could do, I remained exactly where my family wanted me, small, silent, and forgettable. Until April 2024, when I received an email with the subject line, "Position Restructuring, Confidential." That was the day I realized my family wasn't just overlooking me anymore, they were preparing to erase me completely. And the worst part? They thought I'd accept it. I received the termination email on a Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting in my cubicle, sorting vendor invoices, when the notification popped up on my screen. The subject line alone made my stomach drop. Position Restructuring, Confidential. I opened it, then read it again, then a third time, because my brain refused to accept what my eyes were telling it. My role was being eliminated, effective July 1st, 2024. A severance package would be discussed separately. That was it. 2 years of loyalty to the family business, and I was being quietly removed like an outdated office chair. I sat there staring at the screen while the office around me carried on like normal. Phones ringing, printers humming, people chatting about lunch plans. No one knew my entire life had just shifted in one email. That evening, I stayed late, partly because I didn't know what else to do, partly because I didn't want to go home and admit to myself that I had nowhere left to belong. My cubicle sat close to my father's corner office, separated only by a thin wall and a row of decorative shelving. Around 7:15 p.m., I heard voices inside. My father and my mother. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but once I heard my name, I froze. "We can't keep her here," my father said flatly. "Not with Miranda stepping into a bigger role. It looks ridiculous." My mother lowered her voice. "Do you really think people would ask?" "Of course they would," he snapped. "Why the CEO's daughter is working as a secretary, why she was never promoted, why she turned out the way she did." I remember pressing my hand against the desk just to steady myself. Then my mother said something that somehow hurt even more. "We did everything we could for her, Gerald. Some children just aren't built for more." My chest went tight. Some children, as if I were a failed product, a private disappointment. My father sighed. "We'll give her a decent package. She'll land somewhere. Something more appropriate to her abilities." Appropriate. That word hit almost as hard as realistic had years earlier. I sat there in the dark office long after they left, staring at the city lights outside the window. My rent in Queens was already crushing me. I had almost no savings. Losing this job would mean losing stability, maybe even housing. But the panic about money wasn't the deepest wound. The real pain came from the truth settling inside me like ice. They were never planning to let me become anything more. Not in the company, not in the family, not in their eyes. And the next night, they would make that even clearer. Because my sister's graduation celebration at the Plaza Hotel was less than 24 hours away, and my father had one more public announcement planned, one that would officially write me out of the future. What he didn't know was that my grandmother had already written me back in.
The next evening, I arrived at the Plaza Hotel Grand Ballroom feeling like I had accidentally wandered into someone else's life. The room was pure, Manhattan excess, crystal chandeliers, gold trim, fresh white roses on every table. A live orchestra in the corner playing soft jazz like this was some kind of royal event, which, for my father, it basically was. This wasn't just a graduation party, it was a coronation. My sister, Miranda Whitford, was being unveiled as the future of the family, and I was there as decoration. I had spent almost everything I could afford on a simple black dress and a pair of shoes that looked better sitting down than standing up. It was the best I could do on my salary. My mother intercepted me before I even reached the seating chart. Her eyes swept over me from head to toe. "That's what you're wearing?" I swallowed. "It's what I have." She gave a tight smile. "Well, you'll be seated at table 27, near the back. Try not to draw unnecessary attention tonight." Then she leaned in, perfume and judgment hitting me at once. "And Dulcie, whatever bitterness you're carrying, keep it off your face. Tonight is not about you." Then she walked away, like she had done something helpful. Table 27 was near the service entrance, partially blocked by a decorative column. My view of the stage was fine, but the message was clear. Be present. But invisible. As guests filled the room, investors, attorneys, socialites, distant relatives, I noticed a man standing alone near the main entrance. Older, silver-haired, sharp, gray suit. He wasn't mingling, he wasn't drinking. He was watching. And for one strange second, I had the unsettling feeling that he was waiting for something. At 8:30 p.m., the lights dimmed. My father stepped onto the stage to applause, glass raised, smile polished. He gave a speech about legacy, excellence, and the future of the Whitford name. Then he invited Miranda up beside him. She looked radiant in emerald, green and entitlement. And then he said it. Effective immediately. Miranda Whitford will inherit my estate upon my passing, including the family residence, my private assets, and, when I retire, leadership of Whitford Properties. The room exploded. Standing ovation. Cheers. Cameras flashing. My sister crying, just enough to look graceful. I sat frozen at the back of the room while 350 people celebrated my official erasure. Then, someone stopped beside my chair. I looked up. It was the silver-haired man. He introduced himself. Quietly, My name is Jonathan Ellis. I was your grandmother's attorney. That alone was enough to knock the air out of me. Then he reached inside his jacket and handed me a sealed cream envelope with a red notarized wax stamp. Your grandmother instructed me to deliver this to you, he said, on the day your father publicly disinherited you. I stared at him. Then at the envelope. What is this? He held my gaze. The truth. And in that moment, while my family celebrated inside that glittering ballroom, my entire life split into before and after. I couldn't open the envelope in that ballroom. I could barely breathe. So I slipped out through the side corridor near the kitchen and found an empty service hallway lit by harsh fluorescent lights. The sounds of applause and music faded behind the walls until all I could hear was my own heartbeat. My hands were shaking as I broke the wax. Sealed. Inside were several pages of legal documents, official, notarized, dated, and at the top of the first page were the words, Last Will and Testament of Eleanor Margaret Whitford. He stared. Then read. Slowly. Carefully. My dyslexia made legal language exhausting, but I forced myself through every line. And halfway down the second page, I found the sentence that made my entire body go cold. To my granddaughter, Dulcie Ann Whitford, I hereby bequeath 51% of my shares in Whitford Properties LLC, together with all associated voting rights. I read it once. Then again. Then again. 51%. Not a gift, not a trust fund, not a sentimental keepsake. Control. My grandmother had left me the majority stake in the company. The document went on, and what came next broke something open inside me. In plain language, she explained why. She wrote that I had been overlooked, excluded, and underestimated, not because I lacked ability, but because I had never been properly supported. She wrote, Dooley is not slow. Dooley was abandoned. I had to stop reading for a second because I physically couldn't see through the tears. She had seen it. All of it. Every humiliation. Every family dinner. Every cruel comparison. Every time I was made to feel like less. She had seen. And then I reached the final condition. To activate the inheritance. I had 72 hours to request an emergency board meeting. If I failed to act within that window, the inheritance would revert to her previous will. My father would get everything. My hands went numb. This wasn't just a revelation. It was a countdown. When I stepped back into the lobby, Jonathan Ellis was waiting near the coat check as if he already knew I'd need air. I walked straight up to him. Why would she make it only 72 hours? He answered without hesitation. Because your grandmother knew you. He handed me a second card. This one with his direct number handwritten on the back. If she gave you unlimited time, she knew you might talk yourself out of it. This deadline isn't pressure, Miss Whitford. It's permission. Permission. To stop waiting. To stop begging for space in a family that had already made its choice. To stop asking people who had hurt me to suddenly become fair. Inside the ballroom, I could still hear the celebration. My father was probably still on stage. My mother was probably smiling for photos. Miranda was probably soaking in applause that had always been meant only for her. And for the first time in my life, I realized something. If I acted now, I could destroy the story they had built about me. But if I stayed silent, I would become a permanent footnote in my own family's empire. I looked at Jonathan Ellis and said the words that would change everything. We're calling the board meeting. That night, I went home to my cramped apartment in Queens and pulled the mahogany box from the back of my closet. For years, it had sat there untouched, collecting dust while I tried to build a life around pain I never fully named. Now, with my grandmother's will spread across my bed and a 72-hour deadline hanging over me, I finally understood. This was the moment she had been preparing me for. I sat cross-legged under the orange glow of the streetlight outside my window and lifted the lid. Inside were three things. A handwritten letter, an old legal document with a 1965 date stamp, and a USB drive. I picked up the letter first. It was written in my grandmother's unmistakable hand. She began simply, "My dearest Dulcie, if you're reading this, then your father has done exactly what I feared he would." I kept reading. She explained that the old document was the original partnership agreement from the founding of Whitford Properties. It contained provisions my father had never seen, clauses that protected the founders' voting rights from being diluted without proper board approval. Then came the part that made my skin go cold. The USB, she wrote, contained evidence from a 2018 board meeting. At that meeting, my father had attempted to reduce her controlling power from 51% to 10%, under the excuse that she was too old to understand modern business. She wrote, "He did not fear my age, Dulcie. He feared losing control." And then, one line I will never forget. "He diminished you because he believed your differences made you easy to erase." I knew better. I plugged in the USB. There it was. A file labeled, Board Minutes, March 2018. I opened it. It wasn't just notes. It was evidence. My father had tried to strip his own mother of power while she was still alive. And the board had rejected him. He had been planning for control for years. The next morning, I started making calls. The first was to Margaret Coleman, one of the oldest members of the Whitford board and a longtime friend of my grandmother. She answered on the second ring. When I introduced myself, she didn't sound surprised. "I've been expecting your call," she said. My heart stopped. She explained that my grandmother had spoken to her years earlier. Not in detail, just enough to prepare her in case this exact moment ever came. I told her about the will, the 72-hour clause, the emergency board request. She didn't hesitate. "If you're doing this, I'll help you." By the end of the call, she had already named 2 additional board members who might support a meeting request. That's when I realized something terrifying. This wasn't fantasy anymore. This wasn't a private family wound. This was becoming a corporate war, and my father still had no idea the daughter he called Slow was about to walk into his boardroom, carrying enough On the morning evidence
of
to
May
take
18th,
everything from 2024. I walked into Whitford Tower wearing a borrowed gray blazer and carrying a portfolio that had cost me $12 at a thrift store. I had barely slept. But for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of disappointing my family. I was afraid of becoming powerful enough to no longer need them. When I stepped onto the 42nd floor, the boardroom security guard immediately stopped me. I gave my name. He checked his tablet and frowned. "You're not on the approved attendee list." Before I could answer, a familiar voice cut in behind me. Miranda. She looked immaculate in a navy suit. Every inch the corporate heiress she had been trained to become. Her smile was thin. "Dulcie? What exactly are you doing here?" "I'm here to address the board." She actually laughed. "About what?" "You work in admin." Then my father appeared at the end of the corridor. He didn't even look surprised to see me. Just irritated. "Go back downstairs," he said. "This doesn't concern you." That was the moment. Margaret Coleman stepped into the doorway and said, "Actually, Gerald, it does." The look on my father's face was worth years of pain. Inside, the boardroom was smaller than I expected. Heavy walnut table, leather chairs, portraits of past executives on the walls, including my grandmother, watching from above the fireplace like she had planned every second of this. When the meeting began, Margaret formally yielded her speaking time to me. I stood. My father interrupted almost immediately. He told the board I wasn't qualified, that I had no legal or financial background, that I worked in a support role. Then Miranda added, with polished cruelty, "Dulcie also has dyslexia. Reading complex material has always been difficult for her." There it was. The same weapon they had used against me my whole life, but this time, I didn't flinch. I opened my portfolio, removed the document, and placed it on the table. "I'm not here to discuss my reading ability," I said. "I'm here to discuss this." The room went silent. Jonathan Ellis confirmed the document was valid. My grandmother's will had superseded all previous versions. As of that moment, I legally held 51% of Whitford properties. My father turned white. Miranda tried to call it fraud. Then I presented the second blow. The 2018 board evidence showing Gerald had tried to strip his own mother of power. That changed the room. Fast. No one was looking at me like a joke anymore. They were looking at me like a problem, or maybe, for the first time, like the person in control. And then the chairman turned to me and asked the question no one in that room ever thought they'd ask. Miss Whitford, do you have a motion you'd like to bring before the board? I did. And what I chose next shocked everyone, especially my father, when the board chairman asked if I had a motion to propose. Every eye in the room locked onto me. This was the moment. The one my father had never imagined possible. The one my grandmother had prepared me for years. Earlier, I could have gone for the throat. I could have demanded Gerald's immediate removal as CEO. I had the power. The proof. The legal standing. And honestly, part of me wanted to. But as I stood there looking at my father, not as a daughter, but as the majority shareholder of the company he thought he controlled, I heard my grandmother's voice in the back of my mind. Use this wisely. Not for revenge, for justice. So I made a different move. A smarter one. A cleaner one. I looked at the board and said, I'm not moving to remove Gerald Whitford directly. I'm requesting a formal vote of confidence. The room shifted. Even Miranda looked stunned. I explained it clearly. If the board still had confidence in Gerald's leadership, then he would remain. If they didn't, then the bylaws would take effect and he would be forced to step down. No theatrics. No personal attack. Just governance. Just truth. Margaret Coleman immediately seconded the motion. And then the vote began. Hands raised. Counted. Silence. Then the chairman spoke. 7 votes. No confidence. 4 votes. Confidence. 1 abstention. The motion passed. My father had 30 days to resign. He didn't scream. He didn't argue. He just stared at me with something I had never seen in his face before. Not anger, not contempt, not disappointment. Recognition. For the first time in his life, he understood that the daughter he had underestimated, mocked, and erased was the one who had just ended his reign. After the meeting, he cornered me in the hallway with my mother at his side. He called me manipulative. Ungrateful. A traitor. My mother cried and claimed they had only ever been trying to protect me. But I was done translating cruelty into love. Done shrinking myself to make their version of reality easier to maintain. I told them the truth. You didn't protect me. You abandoned me. And then I walked away. Not because I had won, but because I finally understood something more important. Winning was never the point. The point was refusing to live one more day inside a lie someone else wrote about me. Months later, my father resigned. I accepted a strategic leadership role in the company. Miranda and I slowly began rebuilding something honest. My mother tried, awkwardly, to apologize. And for the first time in my life, I built a future that belonged to me, not because someone finally gave me permission, but because I stopped asking for it. And that, more than the money, more than the shares, more than the company, was the real inheritance my grandmother left me.